Good morning. I want to thank all of you, including our distinguished guest, for being here today. I want to thank the many people at the law school, the university, and the Supreme Court who've worked so hard to make today's event possible. I'm Leslie Kendrick. I'm the Dean of the Law School here at UVA, and I and all of you are here to welcome to the law school Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson of the Supreme Court of the United States. We're so honored to have Justice Jackson here to read from her book, Lovely One, and to have a public conversation with Professor Kimberly Robinson, who's the director of the law school's Education Rights Institute, as well as Justice Jackson's longtime friend. And I have the honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor Robinson, as she opens today's event and also tells you a bit about the Education Rights Institute, of which she is the director and which is celebrating its second anniversary. Professor Kimberly Jenkins Robinson is the White Burkett Miller Professor of Law and Public Affairs and Martha Lubin Karsh and Bruce A. Karsh Bicentennial Professor of Law here at the law school. In addition to leading the Education Rights Institute, she also leads our Center for the Study of Race and the Law and holds appointments at UVA's School of Education and Human Development and at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Professor Robinson earned her BA in Foreign Affairs here at UVA, where she was an Eccles Scholar. She then earned her JD cum laude from Harvard Law School, where she served as an articles editor for the Harvard Law Review. She entered the Legal Academy after years of practice, including service at the US Department of Education, Hogan Lovells, and a Ninth Circuit clerkship. Professor Robinson served on the law faculties of Emory University and the University of Richmond before joining us here at the law school in 2019. As you might expect from someone who studies education, Professor Robinson is an outstanding teacher. Indeed, her remarkable work in the classroom was recognized with UVA's All-University Teaching Award in 2023. Professor Robinson is as prolific a scholar as she is an excellent teacher, widely recognized for her work in the areas of education equity, school funding, education and democracy, equal opportunity, civil rights, Title IX, and federalism. Through her research and writing, and now her leadership of the Education Rights Institute, Professor Robinson advances powerful arguments for strengthening the right to education, bringing clarity and urgency to issues that affect millions of students. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Robinson, who will talk a bit about the work of the Education Rights Institute, and will also introduce our esteemed guest, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Professor Robinson.
I was telling Dean Kendrick, I'm more of a hugger than a handshaker. All right, so good morning, everyone. Good morning. We can do way, way better than that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, that's what I'm talking about. All right, so on behalf of the Education Rights Institute, I would like to welcome you to Lovely One, a conversation with the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. As Dean Kendrick noted, my name is Kimberly Jenkins Robinson, and I serve as the founding director of the Education Rights Institute here at the University of Virginia School of Law. I am so excited to have all of you get to hear from my dear friend and law school roommate. Before I introduce Justice Jackson, I want to take a few moments to tell you about the work of the Education Rights Institute. At the Education Rights Institute, a robust vision of equal educational opportunity serves as our North Star. We believe that advancing equal educational opportunity and a strong education system strengthens our democracy, our economy, and our society. We work every day to bring to life a bold and bright future for our schools and our students. We advance this vision by working with policymakers, K-12 educators, and families to help transform equal educational opportunity from rhetoric to reality. We pursue our vision for equal educational opportunity through 4 priorities. First, we lead and amplify public discourse to advance equal educational opportunity and elevate the value of high public schools for all. Second, we equip educators and policymakers to both recognize and close educational opportunity gaps and make sure that students receive a high-quality public education. For example, on our website, you will find reports and 2-minute videos that highlight why we believe opportunity gaps should be the focus of education reform, and reports and videos about how harmful school funding gaps prevent many students from receiving a high-quality education. Third, we expand educator capacity to interpret and implement protections against discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. We believe that civil rights protections are not just something that a school district general counsel should understand. Teachers, staff, principals, families also should understand these protections to bring them to life. Finally, we are growing ERI's impact by securing diverse funding streams and cultivating a coalition of students, families, educators, scholars, and donors that champion high-quality public schools for all. We are a multidisciplinary team of legal scholars, social scientists, and civil rights attorneys. Our team includes 2 former classroom teachers, Dr. Sarah Beach and Dr. Helen Min. And we also have 2 people, myself and Bridget Joyce, who served at the US Department of Education, working to advance civil rights. And we recently added a 3rd attorney, Tegan Delane, who advocated for marginalized communities in family law, criminal law, and education law. We hope that you will join us in this important work. Please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media so that you can keep up with all that we are publishing and doing. So before introducing Justice Jackson, I do need to say a brief bit of instructions about photos. Photos can be taken for 1 minute after the justice is seated. I will let you know when that minute begins and when it ends. I ask that you hold your photo. You're going to be tempted when she comes to the podium to start snapping away. Please don't do that. She's going to read an excerpt from her book, and then she will join me on the stage, and then I will signal that the 1 minute for photos has begun. I'm sure that all of you law students who are rule followers will do this. This 1 minute also applies to the overflow room. So now, without further delay, it is my honor to introduce our distinguished guest. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson made history in 2022 as the first Black woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court. Born in Washington, D.C., she grew up in Miami, Florida. She received her undergraduate and law degrees both with honors from Harvard University. And then she served as a law clerk for 3 federal judges, including Associate Justice Stephen G. Breyer of the Supreme Court of the United States. Jackson subsequently practiced law in the private sector, worked as an attorney and later as vice chair and commissioner of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and served as an assistant federal public defender. In 2012, President Barack Obama nominated Jackson to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. She was elevated to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit in 2021, and then made history in 2022 when President Joseph Biden nominated her as an Associate Justice. We are so privileged to welcome her this morning as she shares reflections from her book, Lovely One, her journey through law and public service to end up at the highest court of our land. So please join me in giving a very, very UVA Law Warm welcome to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
That was a very warm welcome. Thank you, UVA. I'm excited to be here talking with all of you, and as is my usual practice, I actually like to begin these sessions by reading a little bit from the preface of my book to give you some background on me and to get us warmed up. So the preface is titled A Sacred Trust. I had to keep reminding myself this moment was real. It was just before noon on the 30th day of June 2022, and I was standing in front of a plain wooden door that would soon open into the Grand West Conference Room of the Supreme Court of the United States. My family was already inside. My husband, Patrick, our daughters, Talia and Layla, and my parents, Johnny and Ellery Brown, were there among the family members and friends who had gathered to witness my historic swearing in. My heart was hammering so loudly that I wondered if the two black-robed men standing on either side of me, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and a retiring Associate Justice Stephen G. Breyer, could hear it too. Only 2 hours before, they and the other 7 justices of the Supreme Court had issued their final decision of the 2021-22 term. Justice Breyer, a pragmatic consensus builder, was now stepping down from that august body, having been privileged to serve as one of his law clerks more than 2 decades before. I would be stepping up in his place. I drew a deep breath to steady myself as the door in front of us swung wide and a court officer stepped aside to allow our passage into the room. Suddenly blinded by bright lights, I took a moment to understand that the source was a bank of video cameras set up to record the ceremony. As my eyes adjusted and I processed into the chamber behind the 2 justices, I felt heartened by the sight of my loved ones beaming at me from rows of chairs on the right side of the room. Chief Justice Roberts began by warmly welcoming those present. Then he turned toward me, now assuming a ceremonial air. "Are you prepared to take the oath?" he asked, his voice more formal than it had been a moment before. "I am," I responded, in a voice that sounded firmer than I felt. Patrick positioned himself between Chief Justice Roberts and me and held out a stack of 2 Bibles. "Please raise your right hand," the Chief Justice said, and I did so briskly, simultaneously resting my left palm on the pair of holy books. On top was our ancient Jackson family Bible, its brittle pages protected by the black leather binding that Patrick had had the foresight to get refurbished in 2013 when I'd been appointed to the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. I had sworn every oath since then on this cherished family Bible, just as I would now swear the constitutional oath to be administered to me by Chief Justice Roberts, followed by the judicial oath to be given to me by Associate Justice Breyer. Nominated by President Joe Biden 4 months earlier, I, the daughter of African-American parents who had come of age in the segregated South during the 1950s and early 1960s, would become the 116th justice and the first Black woman to sit on the Supreme Court in its 233-year history. These details made the other sacred volume on which I would swear my historic oath doubly significant. Tucked beneath our family's holy book was the Harlan Bible, donated to the court in 1906 by Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan. This tome had been used for the oath-taking by every Supreme Court appointee since then. Each new justice had also signed one of the book's flyleaves after being sworn in. When the court curator brought the Bible to me in my temporary chambers later that afternoon so that I could add my own signature to the venerated roll, I thought about the justices of Harlan's era who had collectively decided in the Plessy versus Ferguson opinion that state laws mandating the separation of people by race did not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution so long as the separate facilities were equal. Harlan had been the sole dissenter in the notorious 1896 case, and now here I was, affixing my signature to his Bible in black fountain pen ink. Only one generation after my mother and father had experienced the spirit-crushing effects of racial segregation in housing, schooling, and transportation while growing up in Florida, their daughter was standing on the threshold of history, the embodiment of our ancestors' dreams, ascending to a position that Justice Harlan and his colleagues likely never imagined possible for someone like me. But if Justice Harlan and his contemporaries could not have pictured this moment, my family and I, and indeed most of America, were fully cognizant of the significance of my nomination and confirmation to our nation's highest court. In subsequent conversations with people from across the country, I learned that I had been carried on a million prayers lifted up on my behalf since the day of my nomination. I also fielded an avalanche of invitations to speak or appear in person, as excited well-wishers wanted to know my story in whatever form or fashion I might be willing to tell it. How was it, they wondered, that someone with such an unusual name and from such an unconventional background came to stand in such an unprecedented place, swearing an oath on two stacked Bibles that symbolized how far our nation had traveled. Mine has been an unlikely journey in many respects. And my book, Lovely One, is about that journey. Thank you for being here this morning and allowing me to talk about it with you.
We are going to start the 1 minute for photos.
Here's mine. Here's mine. And let me stand. I'll stand. Stand. Yes, we should.
There's still a few more. All right, so welcome to the University of Virginia School of Law. We're so excited to have you here today to talk about Lovely One.
Excited to be here. Is mine on? Yes.
Yes.
Hello? Yes.
Your book has been a New York Times bestseller, a New York Times Book Review, and a New Yorker Best Book of the Year. So it is just doing so well, and I'm so pleased for you.
Thank you.
So we met and became friends at Harvard Law School and then became roommates, and we've been friends ever since. I still learned so much about you from the book, even as I recognized some of the stories as I had experienced them alongside you and learned from our friendship. So let's dive right in. In Lovely One, you describe growing up in Miami in a household that valued education, discipline, and civic responsibility. How did your parents' professions and their expectations of you and your brother shape your early understanding of justice, fairness, and public service?
Well, first, thank you again for having me. I think actually my understandings of justice, fairness, public service really began before my parents, which is why I start the book with my grandparents, who were never had the opportunity really to be formally educated. They grew up in rural Georgia in the 1920s and 30s, and in a time of racial segregation, did not have many opportunities. My grandfather was a chauffeur for a white family. My grandmother worked in the big house, and they moved to Miami because they had heard that even though Miami was also racially segregated, it was offering more opportunities for enterprising Negroes. And so they go to Miami in the 40s, and my grandfather eventually starts a gardening business where he cuts people's lawns. And he makes enough money from this, along with his 3 sons, that he then puts all 5 of his children through college. And they were the first in my family to get the opportunity to go to school. And so education was important to my grandparents, even though they themselves were not educated. My parents this was on my mother's side of the family. My father was born of a single mother. He was sort of self-motivated to put himself through college. My parents then become public school teachers. So they are public school teachers in Washington, D.C., when I was born in 1970. And I usually like to start this by just giving a little bit of background about 1970 in Washington, D.C. This is the year that I'm born, and it is within a few years of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the end of Jim Crow segregation. And so it's a time of great optimism for African Americans. And a number of them moved to Washington, D.C., because that's where these laws came from that changed their family circumstances. And my parents, as public school teachers, understood the importance of education, were feeling very civic-minded, having now been ushered into an era in which they could fully participate. And they spent a lot of time very early on training me to be anything I wanted to be. They were very focused on giving me the opportunities that they had been denied. And it changed my entire trajectory in terms of not only just my abilities, my self-confidence, but also my belief in our system and public service and education.
Thank you for that. So an 11-year-old Ketanji Brown decided she wanted to be a judge after reading a profile of Judge Constance Baker Motley. Mm-hmm. What does Judge Motley mean to you?
Oh, Judge Motley is spectacular. She's sort of a North Star for me in my career. Constance Baker Motley was the first African-American woman to be appointed to the federal bench. And this is in the 1960s, and she had been a civil rights lawyer with Thurgood Marshall. She was in his cohort of lawyers going throughout the South, arguing cases, trying to secure civil rights for African Americans. She was also the first African American woman to argue a case in the Supreme Court. She argued something like, I think I might have the number slightly off, but not by much. She argued something like 10 cases in the Supreme Court, and she won 9 of them. She was a genius, but she didn't have the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court because of the times in which she lived. I learned about her when I was 11 and was very focused on her because we share a birthday. We were born 49 years to the day apart, and I had already been interested in law even that early because my father, who, as I said, was a public school teacher when I was born, when I was about 3 years old, he decided that he wanted to go to law school. He had been a history teacher in public school, and he was in DC taking his kids to the Capitol and to the Supreme Court and whatnot, and then decided, you know what, maybe I'll be a lawyer. So he applied to law school and got into the University of Miami Law School. And that's where he was from, my mom was from, so we moved back. That's why I was raised in Miami. And my earliest memories are of being on the campus of the University of Miami Law School. My dad is at the kitchen table, and he has his law books, and I have my coloring books, and we're working together. So I'd always thought I was going to be a lawyer, like that's what people do. But when I learned about Judge Motley, this woman who was my birthday twin, and she's now a judge, it was like, a door opening for me that early, thinking that I might want to be a judge.
So this is some of what we have so much shared history, because I was also born in DC in 1970, and my dad was a lawyer. And hearing those stories around the kitchen table about all the people's lives that he was helping and the difference he was making. He was a civil rights attorney who worked on employment discrimination. And I remember thinking, like, I want to help people like that.
Yes.
Like, that was the way to make a difference in the world. And same thing, and my parents were like, and you can do anything. Like,
That's exactly right.
You can also help people in this way. So, so you tell in your book about your youth when you were drawn to argumentation and analysis, even before you formally went off to law school. So what experiences or influence in school, at home, or in your community led you to see law not just as a career, but also as a calling?
Well, I was very fortunate, as I said, to have the role model example of my dad going back to law school. So school and law were always kind of in my sights. But I was also fortunate in the fact that I went to a big public high school in Miami that had many different activities that were available, but the one that I chose was speech and debate. And I was actually an orator. I was a speaker on the speech and debate spectrum. And we had a very good team. We traveled regionally and nationally. I did it from essentially the end of 8th grade through graduation, so middle school to high school. And my debate coach put so much effort into the team and into me personally. She taught me how to reason, how to write, how to compete, how to prepare oneself for the rigors of a competitive environment. She is the reason I even applied to Harvard. I didn't know anything about Harvard, except that they had a debate tournament for high school students, and I went there 3 years in a row, and I thought, seems like a nice school, I mean, I didn't do college tours with my parents or anything like that. I just kind of applied to the places that I was familiar with, and that was one of them. And so I think, being in something like speech and debate as a high school student was really foundational for me in terms of argumentation and understanding that I had the talent and the skills and the ability to do the kinds of things that lawyers do.
Yes, it's funny looking back how much young, experiences when we're in our youth really shape us, right?
Yes.
Like speech and debate, sort of carrying all the way through your
Absolutely.
legal career. So let's move on to Harvard, your time at Harvard College. You immersed yourself in both academics and the performing arts.
I did.
Including musical theater and improv. We have a tradition here at the University of Virginia School of Law called the Libel Show, and it held its 117th show last spring.
Wow.
It's an all-student-led...
Quite a tradition.
Yes.
17 years.
Yes. It's an all-student-led production and takes a humorous look at law school, professors, and the legal profession. So, how did engaging in creative expression and collaborative performance help you develop skills or perspectives that later served you in your legal career and on the bench?
Well, I certainly did it because I loved it. I didn't know that I was thinking consciously, this is a connection to doing well in law. I just always loved theater. My mother, as I mentioned, was a teacher, and then she went on to be the principal of a high school for the arts in Miami. So we were always around art and creative expression. But upon reflection, I do think that there are things about theater and about that form of art that have been useful to me. One is obviously just the practice of communication, performance, being able to persuade, in a sense, when you are an actor or an actress. All of those skills play into if you want to become a litigator. They're certainly useful for litigation, talking to a jury, trying to convince them. I also think that there's something to the theater community and the fact that you are working with people who are working across difference with all kinds of people in all different roles when you're putting on a performance. And that's useful for the law as you engage in so many different kinds of disputes, if you're a judge, when you're the arbiter of disputes among different kinds of people. Being able to relate to and understand and have the perspective of working with different people is helpful. And similarly, I think that there's something to the notion, if you're in acting roles in theater, the empathy that you have to develop, the ability to walk in someone else's shoes as an actor. That's what you're doing. You're training yourself to think like that person, to react as that person would react. And having developed that skill, I think that's actually quite useful in looking at people who are bringing to you information and evidence and asking you to evaluate it. You get to see it from the different perspectives. And so I think all those skills have been very, very useful to me in my career as a jurist.
Yeah, I think it's something that sometimes people don't realize how performative the law is.
It is.
Like, it's
It
very
is.
performative. And so I can see how that would dovetail
Absolutely.
with the time that your legal career. All right, so let's turn to your time at Harvard Law School, because in the book you talk a lot about Harvard University and you talk some about law school, but it won't surprise you that our audience wants to know more about your time in law school. So let's dive into that time. All right, so let's just start with some of your fondest memories from law school. What were your favorite classes and what were your biggest challenges? And most importantly, what did you do for fun?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I will start off by saying that I talk more about the college than about the law school because I actually did not have a great time in law school. Yeah, I didn't. Those of us who went to law school, who went to HLS at the time that we went, I understand is very different now in terms of law school's focus on student experience and really trying to make sure that the students are having a good time and learning in the way that is most conducive to student learning. We were
Working.
in the old days. We were in the Socratic method, paper chase kind of law school environment. And Harvard Law School is enormous. I think it's like the second biggest law school that we have. And it felt very much, it was sort of cold and informal, cold and formal in a way that was not my favorite. So I blanked out a lot of it. But, my favorite parts, I enjoyed meeting you. I did. The people, Rich Schrager is here. He was in our class. We enjoyed, he was on law review with us. It was great. I had some professors in some classes that I enjoyed. And maybe we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But it was very different than, so you all should feel very fortunate in a way and privileged to be at a place that cares about your development and that is nurturing you through what is a pretty challenging experience. I loved college. I loved college in every respect. I think law school, you're now on a professional track. You are preparing yourself for your career. So it's a more serious endeavor to begin with. And then if you're in a place that just kind of treats you like, not so warm, yeah.
Yeah, no, our sections were 140 people
Yes.
back then.
Yes.
And the paper chase professors were still there. Like, I remember a student being just screamed at when he got
Yes.
the answer wrong.
Yes.
I ran into him in DC on a metro, and we were talking about law school, and he's like, I was the one who was screaming. He still remembers. Like,
I remember
Yeah.
our section, we collected money for the very first person to be asked a question by our professor on day one of law school, because our professor was notoriously, harsh. And yeah, it was something.
Yeah, It's very different today. So, all right. So your time at Harvard Law School was shaped by rigorous
Yes.
intellectual engagement.
Rigorous.
Let's talk about were there particular professors that you would like to remember, or
Well-
how did they shape your understanding of justice and constitutional interpretation?
There were a few. I mean, I really enjoyed federal courts. I had Martha Field. That's a pretty rigorous course, but the fact that I liked it gave me a clue that maybe I would want to continue to pursue my interest in being a judge and working in the courts. I liked property, of all things. I know, right?
Rule against perpetuities? Like, how is that fun?
No, so let me tell you why. I had a professor, Professor Joseph Singer, and he started the class with the notion that really the property right is the right to exclude. And then he said, let's begin with the paradigmatic scenario of exclusion, which was for him racial segregation. So he started the class with public accommodations and the 1960s and what it meant to exclude people from your restaurant and whatnot. And it was just fascinating because everybody else, I remember the other sections were all learning, the fox in the woods and something,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Like some,
yes.
And we were learning about the 60s civil rights movement. I was like, it was great. But what it showed you is what it showed me at least is how these principles that we're learning in the law they're universal, they translate, they can be in different scenarios, and when you find a professor who creatively takes the core principle and applies it to a different scenario, it can be eye-opening and revelatory in that way. I also ended up really, really liking crim law. That really, I came out of law school thinking that I wanted to do something in criminal law. I took an advanced criminal procedure course with visiting professor Tracy Macklin. That was fabulous. It was a seminar, and that taught me a lot about constitutional law. So I think those were my favorites. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so in the book, you talk about us trying out for the Harvard Law Review and just sort of the grueling nature of that. And then you say in the book, looking back, my time on the Harvard Law Review was easily my favorite part of law school.
It was.
Now, some of the law review editors here might find
Disagree?
that surprising.
Disagree. Well, again, it's all relative.
Yes. It's a good point. Good point. All right. What did you learn from serving on the Harvard Law Review? How did that time influence your legal career? And how is it influencing your time on the court?
What I felt at the time was how similar it was to some extent with an experience that I had between college and law school. Back when I was in law school, when we were in law school, most people went directly from college to law school. It was unusual to take time off. I had the opportunity to work at Time magazine, and my writing professor from college really wanted me to be a journalist and not a lawyer. So he was trying to convince me through setting me up with this internship or this opportunity. And I was a reporter researcher for the business and international sections. I moved to New York City. I lived there for a year between college and law school. And law review, the extent to which you're focusing on these articles and you are fact-checking and you are site-checking was very similar to me, to the work that I had done as an entry-level journalist at Time magazine. So I think I liked that. I liked the focus on language, the development of new ideas. So much of what you learn, especially in the early days of law school, is just what the law is. And the law school, the law review is an opportunity to think through the professor's articles about what the law should be. And that I found very creative and interesting and exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in, Gannett House. So the law review at Harvard is actually its own building, so it felt a little exclusive. And it was a place to retreat. I told you I was not having a good time in regular law school, so to go to Gannett House and get away from everything was really great.
Yeah, and they serve bagels every morning.
They serve
so
bagels.
all the students would come over.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I remember that time. All right, so you also write about your conversations with the law review editors about the O.J. Simpson trial, which gripped the country in 1995 and made you feel for the first and only time in law school, quote, acutely aware of being a Black law student. Can you share more about what you meant and how that shaped your time at Harvard Law School?
Most of you are too young to remember the O.J. Simpson trial. But boy, I mean, if you can imagine, this was a national event. This was a spectacle unlike almost anything we have ever had as a country, because it was a state-level criminal trial. Very, very well-publicized, well-known, dealing with a celebrity that everybody had heard of and knew. And the significance of it being state level was that it was televised. When you are in the federal system, as you know, there are no courtrooms, cameras in the courtroom. But at the state level, there are. And so the whole thing is, I don't even remember how long it was. It might have been 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, but every day, the entirety of this proceeding is on television. So you're basically almost not going to class, not going to work. I mean, and everyone everywhere was watching it. And so to be a law school student while this trial is going on, we're learning about evidence and then running to Gannett House to watch, the presentation. It was fascinating. What I meant about being acutely aware of being a Black student is the fact that there was also pretty well established that there was a huge racial divide in the perception of competence, of credibility. When this evidence was coming in, they would survey people and they would say, did you think that Johnny Cochran made a good argument? And all the Black people would say yes, and all the white people would say terrible. And, and so being on campus now, having these debates with my law school, law review compatriots, it was very, very interesting. And I would look and think, oh, that was an interesting point that Johnny Cochran made. And some of my friends would be like, what are you talking about? It was terrible. And it really broke down in a lot of ways along racial lines. So it was sort of the first time that I thought, wow, there could be a difference, at least as far as this trial was developing, in the perceptions that people have of the evidence and the arguments.
Yeah, and that's something I definitely recall seeing in class as well, the perception of the holding of a case. It's like, wow, this really did a lot of harm. It's like, well, but these other interests that are primary were upheld, and it's like, just sort of questioning those things in ways that sometimes did fall along.
Sometimes,
racial lines,
sometimes, yeah.
All right, so in Lovely One, you reflect on moments during law school when you felt like an outsider, navigating elite academic spaces while holding on to your identity and values. What strategies or mind steps helped you reconcile that tension and find belonging in an environment that wasn't always inclusive?
Yeah, I don't know that I really did a great job of reconciling. I just retreated, as I said, and I found my friends. I had a core group of people that I felt comfortable with. I did a lot of work. I was in the library all the time. I mean, you're preparing yourself for your future career. This is like serious business, and I always prided myself on being a hard worker, but I don't know that I worked harder up until that point than being in law school, especially because I wasn't having fun. So I might as well just buckle down.
And I remember, so we were working hard for law school, and then we did the law review, which was like a 40-hour-week job.
Yes.
But then I remember you then worked in your third year as well some.
So I remember that I did a clinical, and I was working at a family law practice as well, which was very hard. I decided that I definitely wanted to do criminal law after doing family law, which I thought was so much harder. I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of balancing, a lot of juggling, but those are life skills that are very important.
Yeah, that I'm sure you're still using now, that your
Absolutely.
job is a little bit busy.
Just a little.
Just a little. All right, so we have a question from a student, Robert Mira, and what do you wish you knew when you were 1L?
Ooh, what do I wish I knew? Well, I can give advice to one else. Do your own outlines. Do your own out. I mean, this is a hugely important thing because you will see that people will approach you with various outlines that others have done. It is actually the practice, the skill of incorporating the information and turning it into your own outline that helps you to learn it. Don't think that you can just memorize someone else's and you'll be fine. That's my key piece of it.
Did you do a study group?
I did oh yes, absolutely. Study groups are really helpful to synthesize the information. You all go to class and you have your notes and you come together to study. And then eventually you retreat to wherever you go and you write your own outline.
Okay, so let's talk about your clerkships and your career before the court. So you clerked for Judge Patty Saris and Judge Bruce Celia, two jurists who have very distinct styles and philosophies. What did you observe in their courtrooms and chambers that helped to shape your own understanding of what it means to be a fair and principled judge?
Well, first let me just plug clerkships. If you are thinking about being a litigator, there really is, in my opinion, no better training for that eventual pursuit than to clerk. So you should all be thinking about applying to clerkships, looking for clerkships. And the reason is because as a litigator, your job is to persuade a judge to rule in favor of your client, right? You come in with the answer is my client wins. And it's all about the art of persuading the judge to agree with you. And when you have had the chance to work with judges, to be inside of chambers, to read arguments, to understand how a judge thinks, it is enormously helpful for the eventual task of being the one to persuade a judge. So let me just put that out there. I was really fortunate in having the opportunity to clerk at all three levels of the federal system. I clerked for Judge Saris on the District Court of Massachusetts, Judge Celia on the First Circuit, and eventually for Justice Breyer. All of those judges were extraordinary, very different, but extraordinary in their commitment to the law, to the rule of law, their humility, their integrity, their wanting to really do what the law requires in every case, modeling, setting aside their own personal views about things and really focusing on what the law requires. They were phenomenal, each of them in their own ways, and I try to talk about them and give them tribute in the book.
Thank you for that. All right, so you and Patrick have a unique and supportive relationship that has allowed you each to excel and thrive in your careers. Could you share how you both were able to navigate, I won't say balance, because it's never really balanced, but navigate the demands of arduous careers and raising a family?
Well, I was lucky that my husband and I met in college, and I think we both had a very good sense early on that our careers were important to us and that we were going to be together, but we were going to be together under circumstances that would allow for each of our careers to develop. My husband is a surgeon, and so I feel like I went to medical school and he feels like he went to law school because we dated throughout that period and we got married the year I graduated from law school. The way we made it work really was taking turns in the early part of our career. We have two daughters. Once our daughters came, there were parts of his training that I knew he really needed to focus. So when he was in surgical residency is 5 years on top of your 4 years of medical school. And during his residency, he was a resident at the Massachusetts General Hospital. It's one of the best surgical training programs in the country. And they demand, really serious devotion to the training. And so I took a job at a law firm that I wasn't particularly interested in staying big law, for the long term. But I made that sacrifice doing the kind of work I didn't really want to do because somebody had to pay the bills and because I knew he needed to focus. When I clerked for the Supreme Court, for Justice Breyer, he actually took 2 years off of his 5-year surgical residency and came down to Washington, D.C., which is where I had been working at a firm, and then I worked for Breyer to support me in that effort. So his post-medical school training was 7 years because of that. So we took turns going back and forth through the training period, and it's what sustained us. But it wasn't easy. I mean, it absolutely is never easy to combine your lives and your careers, but if you're committed to it, you can absolutely do it.
Yes, this is something my husband Jordan and I have also done, is that we've moved for his career, we've moved for my career,
That's
which
right.
brought us to Charlottesville.
That's
but
right.
it is a constant,
It's a give and take.
recognition of you want your spouse to excel
Exactly.
and do well just as much as you want your own career to thrive. And so you have to be flexible.
Yes.
If you're very rigid
Absolutely.
about it, it just doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about working for the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, and that there you, quote, understood for the first time the awesome power of the law to heal or to hurt real people. Can you expand on that concept and talk about the ways you tried to use the law as a healing force?
Well, the Neighborhood Defender Service was an internship that I did when I was in college, actually. This was before I got into law school. It was my first real opportunity to see how the law worked on the ground. It was also my first opportunity to work with people who, the Neighborhood Defender Service is a public defense institute organization in New York City. It was the first opportunity that I had had to see people who were living in poverty and who were living in a city. I had grown up in the suburbs, middle class, Miami. I really never spent any time in New York at that point, and it was astonishing to me. I mean, it was a whole different level of distress. And what I noticed as someone who had no legal training, I was just, this was between my junior and senior years in college, what I noticed was how much of a difference the legal rules made in the actual lived experiences of these people. So for example, someone would be accused of some relatively minor crime. We're talking about, state level street crime kind of things. And whether or not they got bail could be the difference between whether or not they kept their children, because if they were in jail, then they couldn't work, and if they couldn't work, then their children would be taken from them by the foster home, system. Whether or not their cars were impounded or were taken by the state in the context of some kind of a drug, if it was a drug crime, for example, sometimes the government will take the car or the property that they say is associated with the crime. Well, that car might not even be that person's. That car could be the mom's. He's living with the mom, and now the mom can't work, and the next thing we know, these people are homeless. So it was extraordinary for me to see the cascade of effects in real life that occurred from these legal decisions. And I wrote my thesis about plea bargaining, my senior thesis in college, and it really just gave me a whole new perspective. How do you use the law to heal? I don't really use the law to heal. It's not my job, certainly as a judge. The policymakers are the ones who establish the law and who make the determination about what it should be. But I understood through that experience that it makes a huge difference. Right? I mean, the democratic process is super important. Picking policymakers who are going to do the kinds of things that you think are important for society is important. Yeah.
So you've worked so many places. So you did private practice, the Sentencing Commission, you were a public defender. Did you ever question whether you were on the right path? And if so, what helped you stay grounded and motivated during this?
Well, I feel very fortunate in retrospect. I mean, I have had so many jobs, and part of it was what you were saying earlier about me accommodating my husband's career, that we would move and I'd have to get a new job. We'd go to different places and I'd have to do something different. Also accommodating my needs as a working mother. Some of those early jobs were about me trying to figure out, can I really be in big law and have an infant and have my husband who's a resident? I mean, it was really very challenging. And so I would do other things to try to make it all work. In retrospect, though, I think it was fantastic to have the opportunity to work in so many different environments. One of my favorite quotes is from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who says that the life of the law is not logic, it is experience. And I actually think that's right. I think that now, as a judge, I have so many different experiences to draw upon when I'm evaluating the claims and the arguments that people are making, because I've had I've worked on the Sentencing Commission. I've been a public defender. I've worked in law firms. I've represented corporations and indigent people. I have a well-rounded sense of knowledge regarding how the law actually works in practice because of all the different environments. And if you're thinking about being a judge, doing the kind of work that I do, you actually need a lot of people to support you on the journey to becoming a judge. And so having worked in so many different environments and doing my best work in all of those places, I could call upon those people when it was time to be considered for a judicial appointment for recommendations and support.
So this is one of the student questions, is from McKenna Kate. What was your best advice you received after you started your career? So you had this varied path. Were there some words of wisdom along the way that helped you navigate that path?
I think one of the best, given the experiences that I just mentioned, is to not burn bridges as you go through your career. Super important. I mean, there were jobs that I took that I really did not like, but no one in that environment would know that, right? Because I still did my very best work, because when I left, it was because I had this wonderful other opportunity that I couldn't turn down, right? It was not because I hate your job and I don't want to be here anymore. It's very important because you never know when you're going to have to cross those bridges again. So just as an example, Judge Saris, who I clerked for right out of law school, eventually gets appointed to be the chair of the Sentencing Commission at the time that I'm there. And so now I'm working with her as a colleague, the judge that I clerked for. Mm-hmm. You never know when these people are going to come back into your life, and so you need to keep them in your corner, no matter what.
Yeah, so that I'm definitely living that a little bit here at UVA Law School. So there are 3 other classmates from our class who are here on the faculty, and so those relationships have just continued.
Absolutely.
So Elizabeth Rowe, Rich Trager, David Law, all they're at Harvard with us, and we're still.
It's a good thing they liked you, because if they didn't, when you applied here, they would have been like,
they'd be like, nope.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
we don't need her, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about, as you move through the court system. So following your nomination and confirmation to the D.C. District Court, you summed up your investiture by saying, it takes a village to raise a judge. Mm. Mentors have been so critical. Can you tell us about some of the mentors? We talked a little bit about that.
We talked a little bit.
Yeah. And also how they are just still influencing your time now, even on the court.
Well, all 3 of my judges, and I still call them my judges. It's a little embarrassing when I'm with Justice Breyer and I call him my judge, but as I said, they were so different in the way in which they approached and thought about the law and taught me different things. So Judge Selya, for example, was really fastidious with respect to his writing opinions. He would make at the time there were only 3 law clerks on the Court of Appeals. Okay. Now there are 4, but at the time he had 3 law clerks, and he would make all of us read all of his draft opinions, and he would line number the drafts and we would sit around a big table and literally go page by page. He would say, okay, page 15, and we would look at page 15, and you were expected to have read it already and come up with whatever comments or questions you had. And I would say, page 15, line 20, I think there's supposed to be a comma in this sentence, and he would go, no. Next page, and we would literally, it would take hours of that level of, fastidiousness is the only word that comes to mind. But I appreciated that, and it taught me the importance of good writing, opinion writing, caring about the presentation in terms of opinions. Judge Saris was the warmest, kindest, most open-hearted, wonderful jurist. She's a trial-level judge, and I modeled myself to the extent possible when I was on the district court after her style, because she was just extraordinary. Everybody wanted to appear before her because they felt like they would be taken seriously, that she would listen to them, that she would really take into account what they were saying. And her sentencings, all of it, I really appreciated. And of course, Justice Breyer is just brilliant. And his way of thinking about the law and statutory interpretation and constitutional issues was very influential for me and his other law clerks.
Yeah, I remember when I became a law clerk, one of the lore among the clerks was that Judge Browning would edit opinions so much that you would end up with just a single word left that you would propose in the draft.
Absolutely.
It was very rigorous editing, very, send it back to you and say, try again.
That's the one thing that you learn that is really helpful, that you really do start as a clerk to separate out you're writing for your judge, you're trying to write in their style and in their voice, you're drafting for them, but you lose kind of pride of authorship because it's their work, it's their opinion, and they edit it, and you don't feel bad, you did your best, and you try again, you try again the next day.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your hearings. I bet many of us watched those hearings for your nomination to the Supreme Court. I was there with you.
Yes, you were.
And so they really, at that point, you're just catapulted into the national spotlight, intense public scrutiny, as well as the historic significance of the moment. Tell us about that process. What are some of the greatest challenges in navigating that process?
Yeah, it was something.
Yeah.
One of the things that was most challenging about my process was the speed with which the White House decided they wanted to proceed. Traditionally, a Supreme Court justice appointment is about something like 6, 7, 8 weeks between nomination and confirmation. Mine was 3.5. And it was because the preceding justice, Justice Barrett, was like 2.5. And so the White House said, oh, that's going to be the new model as to how we do this. The reason why that is a lot is because as a Supreme Court justice appointee or nominee, you are expected to not only be prepared for the confirmation hearing in terms of the substance, because anybody could ask you anything about the law, and you're expected to have some sort of response that resembles the legal issue, but you also have to meet with the senators. There's a political aspect to it, especially the senators who are on the committee, and then the senators, all of them, end up voting on your nomination. So this was crammed into a very short period of time for me. It was 18-hour days, both at the White House and on the Hill. And it turned out I actually was quite upset at the White House for making me also meet with the senators when I was prepping. The president makes the announcement. I'm there in the cross hall of the White House. I'm so excited to have gotten through a speech that I had written within 12 hours because I only knew 12 hours before my public appearance that it was me. I go back to the White House counsel's office, and in walks some other staffers with these huge binders of substantive material. This is a Friday. They say, we'll see you tomorrow morning. Here's what you have to start learning because your hearing is going to be in 2 weeks. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And it was like that. And so I thought, okay, for 2 weeks, I can buckle down and learn all these materials. Right. And the White House counsel said, no. You see, you're going to learn the materials like 3 days out of the week, and the other 4 days, you're going to go to the Hill and talk to senators. And I was like furious about this. But it turned out to actually be the best thing that happened. And the reason was because I ended up talking to all of the senators who were on the committee beforehand and some who were actually going to do the questioning and a few others. And when I talked to them, these are 1-hour meetings on the Hill in their offices. To a person, they were lovely, lovely, all of them. We had coffee, we talked about our families, a little bit about the law, but totally wonderful. When I'm there in the hearing and they're not lovely, not wonderful, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is a performance. You're not really talking to me when you're asking me these terrible questions because you and I have had a conversation. We're good. You're talking to your constituents. Mm-hmm. And that made me calm. Right? People have asked me, why weren't you angry? Why weren't you? Because I appreciated that what we were doing was not really about us. And so the White House making me talk to them was like amazing. Amazing.
Yes, it was quite a performance in that room. A lot of really beautiful moments there. Memorable ones. I do want to bring up one in particular, actually. So the moment with Senator Booker.
Oh, that was fabulous. That was not rehearsed. I didn't know that he was going to do that.
Yes, so I remember it so well. So he's talking. I definitely remember Patrick, tears are starting to come down his eyes. I look over, and it was such a beautiful moment. So can you tell us what that moment was like for you? Like, how did you experience that?
Senator Booker, for those of you who watched or don't really know, or didn't watch or don't know the process, there are 12 members on each side of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they have a time block where they can ask you questions, and they go through rounds. And over a 2-day period, it's just as many rounds. Anybody can continue to ask questions over and over and over again. And they're going in order of seniority, and they're switching off one side to the other. And by the end of the second day, when it was Senator Booker's turn, he said, I'm not going to ask you any questions because I know you're tired. You've been going through a lot. So I'm just going to talk and let you rest. And then he starts talking about how joyful he is feeling about this moment and about my appointment, the fact that he has constituents who are coming up to him. He talks about a lady who accosts him on the street and is telling him, you better support her, you better do what you can. And he said, so I know you've been asked a lot of rough questions, but I'm not going to let anybody steal my joy over your appointment. And then he said, at one point, he goes on and on about how when he looks at me, he sees his mother, his grandmother, his ancestors, my ancestors, and how significant this moment is for the nation. And then he ends essentially by saying, so I want you to know that you have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American. And when he said that, I just burst into tears. And the hard part is that I had been saying the whole time, I'm not going to cry, don't cry, don't cry. And I couldn't help it. I mean, it was just, his eloquence was unmatched. And in that moment, to have the opportunity to breathe and to think about the momentous nature of the entire occasion, it was glorious. My favorite part of the hearing by far.
Yes, it was, yes, such a special moment. So you talked just now about like just the significance of you rising to the court and what it means for our nation, what it means really to our world. I mean, your face and name are known around the world, and it just brings such, it inspires from the littlest ones to the grandmothers. Like, you're just influencing so many people.
I feel like it says something about our country and the greatness of our country. I mentioned, as I said, Constance Baker Motley, who was born 49 years before I was, but never had the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court, even though she was the first black woman to argue there, argued there repeatedly, would have been a fantastic justice. But because of the times in which she lived, she was prevented from having that opportunity. So it's about progress that I get to serve now, and I'm so grateful for that.
How have you been just processing this milestone, like the weight of this professionally, like stepping into this centuries-old institution, but also personally, as you are just carrying the hopes and prayers of so many, right? As you do this job.
I try not to think about it. You can't do the job. No, really. I mean, you can't. Moments like this, doing the book, getting to talk to audiences is the like break that I get to think about the momentousness of the occasion. But you certainly can't do the job day to day focused on that. I was called to do the work. I am very busy doing a lot of the work that the court is requiring at this point. I feel honored and privileged to be there. I feel very prepared. As I said, I clerked for all 3 levels of the federal system, and I was a judge on all 3 levels of the federal system. So, I know what I'm doing. And that is some comfort, because what comes with being a first, what comes with a historic appointment, is the knowledge that people are watching, that people want to know whether I can do this job, what I'm doing, how is it going. And for me, at least, for now, I feel like it's going pretty well.
So this is a question from one of the students, Farzana Tasnim. What are the biggest challenges and rewards to being a justice? So talk about your job.
So I would say it's a big challenge, actually, to make decisions collectively. I was a district judge for 7.5 years before getting appointed to the circuit. I was only on the circuit for like 9 months before I got onto the Supreme Court. Now, I'd been an appellate lawyer, so my practice after clerking for the Supreme Court, even when I was a federal public defender, I was an appellate defender. So it's not the appellate work that is so different, but it is the idea of being a judge and having to reconcile your views with other judges on the panel, not getting to say what you really want to say when you're writing a majority opinion. Collective decision-making is much harder than I thought. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. The biggest reward is the platform that it does give me as a justice to communicate with people, to do these kinds of events, to bring children to the court, which I absolutely love. There are so many, even elementary schools, my assistant's here, the elementary schools reach out. People who are over in Southeast who live, within the shadow of the Capitol and the court and would never even think about coming to the Supreme Court, come, and I talk to them, and I try to inspire them to think about the law and invest in our government and in our country. It's the best, the absolute best.
Yes. I know that you're such an inspiration to our daughters, too, so they love hearing from you. So were there any expectations that you had in sort of stepping into this role? How did you think it would go, and then how is it different from the lived reality of being?
There wasn't a lot of time to think about it ahead of time.
That's true.
I mean, there just
It
really
was very
wasn't.
quick.
It was such a whirlwind to get onto the court. because I had clerked on the court before, I was familiar with the operations of the institution. It doesn't change very much from a practical standpoint of how the court operates, and so none of that, I think, was different, or I knew what to expect in that regard. I think the court is actually more formal than I even remembered from the time that I clerked. The justices are very formal. We do things like shake every other justice's hand every time before we go out onto the bench. And we do this in private in the courts, in the chief's conference room, which is one of the traditions that I was not aware of at the time that I was clerking. Also in conference, I didn't have any basis. So conference is the meeting where the justices meet after oral arguments and after a case has been submitted to decide the case, to vote. And there's a very formal process for going around and discussing it and for voting. And I kind of thought it might be more free-for-all, but it's not. It's really not. And so I think that was a surprise.
So I actually teach a seminar in Women of the Supreme Court, and one of the things that we learn about is what it's like to be the newest justice on the court. Like there are traditions of things that you have to do. Can you tell us about serving as the newest justice on the court? What does that mean?
Yes, so the newest justice, one of the things you have to do in conference is you have to answer the door. So, because the conference is just the 9 of us, no assistants, no anybody else. And when someone knocks, you have to get up, and inevitably one of my colleagues has left their glasses, or Justice Barrett needs a scarf, or a shawl. It's cold in there. So you spend a lot of time answering the door, and you take notes. You are responsible. You're sort of the secretary. You read out to the staff members what has happened in conference, because people would have to know what we voted on. And you are appointed to the cafeteria committee. I'm the head of the cafeteria committee, and we've made some great strides. We have electronic ordering, which they did not have before, and court staff had to stand in the lines with all of the tourists to get their sandwich. And I was like, what is happening here? So we actually can order from apps on our phone now, and that is a great development.
The court is certainly better for it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we'll wrap up with just these 2 questions. So you are the 6th woman to be on the court. When you think about the women that preceded you, can you tell us about how they influenced you, how you think about standing on their shoulders, and what you've learned from them?
That's such a great question. Well, I'm fortunate because 3 other women are currently serving with me, so that's great. Yes. It's very nice to have a cohort. And the Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg, who preceded us, or me, have been enormously influential. I remember thinking about being a possible Supreme Court justice in middle school when, after learning about Judge Motley, Sandra Day O'Connor gets appointed to the Supreme Court. So now we have a woman on the Supreme Court. And it really meant that the sky was the limit in terms of my future abilities and possibilities. And of course, Justice O'Connor was just a lovely, lovely human being. Both Justice O'Connor and Ginsburg were on the court when I clerked. And one of the things you get to do as a Supreme Court clerk is have lunch with the other justices of other chambers. And so I remember very vividly interacting with Justice O'Connor in that more informal way. And Justice Ginsburg would have a tea in her chambers. She was a formal person, but also just extraordinarily powerful in terms of her writing and her career before even coming to the court, all that she did for paving the way for civil rights for women. So she was an icon in so many ways, and I do stand on their shoulders. And as I said, I'm fortunate to work with other women in the context of my current job. So I feel pretty lucky.
All right, so last question. Lovely one.
Yes.
It's just a beautiful journey from, starting with your grandparents, all the way through your parents, and then your childhood, through your professional career, and now ending with the court. So when readers have finished your story, what do you hope that they take away from your story? What do you want that lasting, thing to be planted in their heart for them to walk away with?
Well, I hope they are inspired to follow their own dreams. What I'm trying to tell is the story of a child who followed her dreams, who had a lot of support, but who also had challenges. I talk in the book about a number of professional challenges, personal challenges, the difficulties my husband and I had with raising one of our daughters is autistic, and the discovery of that and how it shaped our professional journey, but still we got to where we wanted to go. I put all that in there because I wanted people to understand that if I could do it, kid from big public school in Miami, Florida, who'd never heard of Harvard, you can do it, and I just think, I hope it is an inspirational tale. In the book, I say, if you are diligent and well-prepared, relentlessly optimistic, and resolute in purpose, you can build a brilliant life for yourself. And I hope that people take that away and then do.
Thank you for that.